Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for July 24th, 2023. Today I'm going to be discussing the simple point, which is that despite all efforts to do so, the truth will ultimately not be suppressed. We were told that the counteroffensive will succeed as long as Ukraine is given weapons and money, that it's a pretty much sure thing. The assessment was based on the idea that sanctions would weaken Russia, that NATO unity would hold up, and that therefore Russia would be forced to reckon with a unified Europe and a unified world, that Russia would be isolated, Russian forces would have low morale, Russia would run out of ammunition, and so on. Well, the Wall Street Journal on July 22nd had somewhat of an antidote to this assessment. They essentially said that Western officials knew that the Ukrainian counteroffensive would not succeed. They point out that there was a recognition of a lack of supplies in Ukraine in spite of the billions of dollars that have been spent, the weapons that have been shipped, and so on, that in spite of all the training, that there are a lack of trained personnel in the Ukrainian military. In fact, Ukraine is running into a demographic crisis now, a lack of troops. They're pulling people off the streets and putting them into the military. And more importantly, there's an inability to counter Russia's air superiority. Nevertheless, we just saw the Vilnius summit and what was said there. We have to stay the course. Russia is weak, Russia is going to end up losing, and the West will win. Then you have the spokesman for the Western policy with one lie after another. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, said, quote, "We believe Ukraine will succeed and will meet success in the counteroffensive." Well, Sullivan has been cheerleading along with his sidekick Blinken. Dan Rice, who's a U.S. military advisor in Ukraine, previously was with the U.S. military in Iraq. He said the counteroffensive, quote, "will shock the world." Well, maybe what's shocking to the world is how deluded Western officials are. Polish President Duda said Ukraine will oust Russia, quote, "from all occupied territories," unquote. Now, meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal has an estimate that at least 26,000 Ukrainian troops have been killed so far in the counteroffensive. 3,000 pieces of hardware have been lost. Tanks are burning. The Bradley vehicles are being destroyed in large numbers. And there are estimates that as many as 300,000 Ukrainians have died so far in this war. Now, the Wall Street Journal goes on to report that the Western officials have now officially, behind the scenes, not publicly, but behind the scenes, they have, quote, "downgraded expectations," unquote, and they're, quote, "alarmed by the results," unquote. So what are the options? Deploy longer range weapons so they can hit inside Russia, risking an escalation of the war. Send fighter jets to attack Crimea and long range missiles to attack Crimea. Send NATO troops to make this a war of NATO against Russia. Meanwhile, NATO is running short of ammunition as a result of the green policy, as a result of the sabotage of energy supplies from Russia, the destruction of the North Sea pipelines. So with less weapons, how are they going to fight? There's a war weariness in Western countries. While the economy is going south in the West, the economy is collapsing. There's an inability to produce the ammunition because of deindustrialization. So there are cracks appearing within NATO, and opposition is growing. Now, what does this all stem from? This was all totally predictable. From 2008 to 2022, Russian President Putin was insisting that the West recognize that Russia has legitimate security concerns about eastward expansion of NATO, the moving increasingly closer to the border of NATO weapons and NATO military. The West should have known this. What happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962? Kennedy said it's unacceptable that Soviet missiles be placed that close to the United States. Why wouldn't Russia have the same concern? Well, they brushed that off. They said that's paranoia. NATO's a defensive alliance. You have no concerns unless you wish to be offensive. You had the Minsk fraud, where the Western governments, in particular France and Germany, pledged that there would be an agreement which would give limited autonomy to the Donbass. Ukraine would essentially be not a base for use against Russia. But it was admitted that this was an intent to buy time to train Ukrainian forces for the war. Then you had the belief that Russia would be isolated, ignoring the fact that much of the world looks at NATO as the colonizing forces of the last 200 years and does not agree that this should be continued. In fact, there's a rupture with the neo-colonial policy, and we're seeing increasing assertiveness of leaders from the global south. Then you see things like the Wagner mutiny, where there was a momentary orgasm of delight from the West. Russia's cracking, Putin's finished. Well, what we can say is that NATO, the US, the UK has been wrong repeatedly. Their assessments have been wrong. Their evaluation of Russia has been wrong. Their belief in the supremacy of the sole superpower has proven to be wrong. Are they going to keep adding to this record of wrong assumptions? And what happens if NATO sends troops? What happens if the longer range missiles start going and taking out Russian targets? Well, then you risk the danger of nuclear war. They keep saying that it's not possible. Well, what if they're wrong again? So they're trying to, meanwhile, desperately suppress candidates in the United States who are against the war. In particular, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Donald Trump. You had this farcical House hearing on censorship, where Robert F. Kennedy was there as a speaker, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who played this role in 2016 as DNC chairman, suppressing the Sanders campaign, calling for censoring Kennedy from speaking at a hearing on censorship. It's farcical. It's unbelievably stupid, almost comedic. With Trump, you have one indictment after another. It just keeps making him more popular, because the alternative is sleepy Joe Biden and unpopular figures like DeSantis and Nikki Haley. What's the alternative? Excuse me, I've had this cold that won't seem to go away. What's the alternative? Well, the Schiller Institute is building an international peace coalition. I'll put some information on this in the description box. Join us, work with us. We have to end this period of lying, censorship, and idiocy from the West. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again tomorrow.
Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.